Hey everyone, and welcome to That Vintage Lens podcast. I'm Branden Stanley, your host, and I'm here with Daniel Gebert. We're actually recording here at Spirit Juice Studios, who is sponsoring this podcast. And Spirit Juice Studios is an award-winning Chicago-based creative production firm specializing in the transformative power of high-quality visual media. So essentially, video production firm doing some great stuff here. We're recording in the studio space. And today we're talking a little bit about the resurgence of film, kind of how film is coming back and becoming more popular, and why that is. So, first off, I just want to start talking a little bit about kind of personal experiences with film. Like, when did you first encounter film, that sort of thing? So I'll throw it over to you, Daniel. Did you grow up with it, or?
Yeah. So the only cameras that I used when I was a child, and the only cameras that I saw were film cameras. You know, digital wasn't powerful enough, wasn't good enough at that time to be the mainstream. But it was there. You know, it was like I didn't really grow up in the film world necessarily, but that's what I used. I used disposable cameras when I was a kid, and then eventually got a DSLR and forgot about it. You know, in high school, film wasn't even on my radar.
Yeah.
But you know, my mom was a film photographer, and so there's always that kind of history, and there were always film cameras in my house. So
Yeah, that's kind of how it was for me too. I remember the first camera that I was able to shoot on my parents' old, it was a Canon Sure Shot something. I can't remember.
Point and shoot?
Yeah, it was pretty much a point and shoot, but it was really weird because it had, it wasn't a zoom lens, but it was a dual, it had like two lenses built into it, essentially.
Dual focal length?
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
an iPhone 7 Plus,
Exactly.
iPhone 10.
So you'd hit a button and the whole thing would move out, and then another lens would kind of go in between. So it had like a wide angle, and then it had like a telephoto lens on it. It was kind of crazy, but it actually worked kind of well.
Yeah.
And so that was my dad's old Sure Shot. It's kind of funny though, because eventually my mom tossed it. She thought, once we moved over to digital, which and I remember we're kind of in a unique situation because we remember when digital was becoming popular.
Oh, yeah.
And when it kind of took over.
Yeah.
Because I think it was 2013 when digital finally 2013. 2003.
I was going to say, yeah.
when digital finally kind of outpaced the film sales, film camera sales. Because, at the time it was like, you'd have a camera with a couple megapixels, and aside from the fact that it was really convenient, the quality just wasn't there.
Right.
I remember the first digital camera that I actually shot with was I had an uncle who had a Kodak. It was just a megapixel camera. It wasn't like, it didn't say 1 megapixel, 2 megapixel. No, just megapixel camera.
Man, that's a selling point right there.
Yeah, it recorded to, I think it was like an 8 megabyte compact flash card, and you could fit a decent amount of photos on there, but it through
1 megapixel.
Yeah,
it's a lot of space.
8 through AA's like nothing else. But yeah, so it was. I remember when digital kind of became the new thing, and because I was looking at a DSLR or an SLR, I guess at the time.
Yeah.
Right when that transition was happening, and so it was a big conversation. Like, okay, do I go with a film camera or do I go with digital?
Right.
And eventually, I went with digital. I went with my first digital camera was a Nikon D100, which was 6 megapixels. It was actually a pretty sturdy camera for the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it couldn't go anywhere above like 1600 ISO was almost unusable.
Yeah. My brother's first camera was a D40 that I gifted him. And it was the exact same. I'm sure that came out in a similar time point. But
probably so,
it was like, man, you go ISO 800 and you're pushing it.
Yeah.
You got grain and it's like
10
megapixels or something.
Yeah, and it wasn't even full frame. It was an APS-C.
I don't even think full frame was
not on Nikon's side.
Not even there.
Because the 5D was the first full frame
mainstream camera.
Yeah, it's just interesting to look back, and I honestly forgot about film for the longest time.
Yeah, same.
Because I at least got into digital, and it was just like, this is what people are doing. This is what photography is at this point. completely forgot about film and didn't even think about shooting film for the longest time.
I think a lot of that comes down to the way that we interpreted like the film process. When I was a kid, it was you take your film photos on for me, it was a disposable camera or my mom's SLR or whatever, and then you send them to Walgreens, you get them developed, and you get it back on like a CD.
Yeah.
So for me, it didn't even matter the image capture. It was just the way that I got them delivered was on a CD and then like some prints.
Yeah.
Which when we transitioned to digital, it didn't change. It was the exact same thing. You have a digital version and you had the print version.
Yeah.
So it didn't really, I don't think it even registered for me at that time, the difference between digital and film until I got a little bit older.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that at the time, you think, okay, film is slower, and that's the main differentiator there. It's, and you can't take nearly as many photos. You have to carry film with you. It's this whole process. And so when you are trying to take family portraits or, just when you're growing up, it's like, why would I shoot film when you have access to digital?
Right.
And I think there are quite a few people still who have that mentality. It's like, why would I shoot film because it takes longer? And certainly there for a while, when even once digital was kind of mainstream, there were still a lot of selling points for film. You could still scan it in at a higher resolution than a lot of the cameras.
Definitely higher than a megapixel.
Definitely higher than a megapixel, yeah. And it had better latitude, certainly. Like you could get a decent amount of dynamic range out of film, whereas early film digital sensors were just
Was there even a post-production process in the early days of digital when it was that Kodak one megapixel camera? Like what was post-production like? Because
really it was like the built-in picture profile and
then that's it.
And it recorded the JPEG. That one, I don't think that one had the possibility of even shooting RAW. It was just direct to JPEG.
So I feel like the tinkerers were the ones who were hanging onto film at that time. The ones who were going to Ansel Adams and spend 10 hours in the dark room, like really pulling every ounce of their image out. And until I want to say the 5D, once the DSLR revolution kind of started kicking in with digital photography and RAW, then it kind of leveled out the playing field.
Yeah, definitely. Because I remember that in college, that was kind of the first time I was reintroduced to film. I still had a film camera. I was given one in high school. Someone had this old SLR that I think it was a Minolta. I can't remember the model. But they had taken it all over the world.
Anymore.
Yeah, exactly. But they had traveled all over the world with it, and they had a few lenses, and they were like, hey, we know you're into photography. Why don't you take this? And so it was given to me for free. And at the time, I was kind of like, well, thank you. That's cool. Maybe I'll use it as a display piece of some sort. But the thought of actually shooting it was just not really on my horizon.
Right.
And then Aaliyah, my wife, she actually took a photography course in college because that's what she took a few photography courses because that's what she majored in. But she was looking for a 35 millimeter SLR, and I had one that was just sitting in my closet unused. So she used that for a while. It ended up breaking. But that was kind of the first time when I was like, really? Like people are still doing that? Like isn't this an old format that's like really outdated? And
right. Almost how you'd look at like an old DV camera, right? With like tape and stuff. It's like that's just a dinosaur, you don't even that's not even in use anymore. But
yeah, and my mom I think my mom's still the same way because I'll talk about shooting film and she's just like, I don't understand it. It feels like, I think she can comprehend that there's more of an art to it. Yeah. But there's still this idea in her mind of like, well, I've got a digital camera and I remember shooting film and it's just more work to shoot film.
For sure.
And I think for a great many people, like if you're just going out and taking a ton of pictures, unless you're really going to cherish those, like maybe it doesn't make sense for everyone to shoot film at this point.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It definitely does.
Because there's a place for digital. I think some people fall into a lot of photographers are either like entirely digital or some people are just like, why would you shoot digital? Like shoot everything on film.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a balance to be struck there that
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't go anywhere with a film camera without my digital camera, at least my phone, and yeah, just the fact of being able to immediately see the gratification of like this photo that I just took on the back of the screen or on your phone or whatever. There's, having lived in the digital world, completely immersed by digital photography, I don't even think I could go back necessarily
Entirely,
to
yeah.
just film, or it would take a lot for that to happen.
And I know some people do shoot almost exclusively film, and I have to really give them props for that. I think for me, there are just certain things where I'm like, because film is more expensive to shoot in some ways. I mean, you can pick up certainly a camera for dirt cheap these days compared to picking up like a 5D or something like that, and get spectacular results. But I'm not going to, like, when we fly out of the airport here in Chicago, when I'm trying to remember where I park, I pull out my phone and I take a picture of the sign. I'm not going to take something like that on film.
Right.
I mean, that's an extreme situation.
But it's worth bringing up.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole area of uses for digital photography, like instant, on the phone, kind of low quality stuff that it's more of just like a resource necessarily than like an art. It's just, like you said, for taking a picture of whatever parking lot you're in.
I tend to try and save film for the moments that I'm going to want to remember long term, things that I know I'm going to come back to, not just something that I'm capturing right now and may care nothing about later on.
Right.
Because at that point, like, I've already got the digital camera, I might as well use it for something that isn't really going to matter down the road.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting because film is definitely coming back in a lot of ways. There are exceptions to that, and that Fujifilm is killing off like all of their film stocks at this point.
Which is still a mystery to me as to why they're doing that. Yeah,
I guess they're focusing a lot more attention on Instax, which is incredibly popular at this point.
I just invested in Instax, so there you go.
Yeah, which one did you pick up?
I got the Lomo Instant Wide.
Okay.
Yep.
Has that come in yet?
Yeah, I've been messing around with it a little bit.
What's it been like so far?
All of the issues that are, the issues that I've been having with it are the issues that are well established online, and everyone who has one has done a review on those issues, and all that kind of thing is out there. And it's the metering system is not the greatest. It's kind of hit and miss, which is unfortunate for an instant camera, because that miss could be your last photo on that in that pack. But aside from that, the quality is very characterful, and it's a joy. It's so much fun, and that's. I think at the end of the day, that's what brings you and I back to film, is that connectedness. Like it's more tactile. If that even makes sense, it's not, but it feels like it's more tactile. You're kind of in tune with the mechanism. Yeah,
and that does bring us to kind of why film is having a resurgence.
Yeah.
And I think there are lots of reasons for that. There are lots of reasons. I mean, if you ask any film photographer, why do you shoot film? They're not going to just have one reason and say, oh, it's this and nothing else.
Right.
There are a lot of aspects there. I think a big one is just that digital has become so prevalent, especially digital cameras that take great pictures have become so prevalent that it's almost losing some of the artistry to it. To a certain extent. I mean, not to say that there isn't art with taking, digital photos, but I think that there are so many people, like, it's just so easy to pull out a 5D, throw it on auto or, one of the auto functions and just shoot away. And suddenly, we've had days here when we're shooting for work when we'll end up with 3,000, 4,000 photos in a day, sometimes more. And while that's good sometimes for a client, because you can go back and say, okay, we have all these photos, now we can pick out the best ones, and we know we're going to make the client happy. If you're doing something like that just for yourself, like I know it's gotten so tiring for me to go back through and just sort through all the photos that I've taken.
Yeah.
And so it becomes very clinical and kind of sterile.
Because I guess it's like you have to go through the ones that matter to you, and when you only have 24 exposures, or 36 or whatever, or 10, for the Lomo Instant, it's like it's 10.
Yeah.
And so every single one matters to you, as long as like the photo turned out. It's like there's just more to it. You're not just going to throw it in the trash and forget about it.
Right. Because I know there have been plenty of times when I've pulled out my film camera and I'll frame up a shot and then I'll go, and I don't take the photo because I think about it and I sit there and go, do I actually want to capture this or am I just, pointing the camera in that direction and snapping away?
Yeah.
Whereas if I've got something like the 5D or I've got, you can tell we're Canon shooters here. We even though I started on Nikon.
I have a Nikon.
Okay. We have a lot of access to Canon equipment at work. We do have some Nikon stuff here too.
Yeah.
And used to have Sony, but not quite as much these days.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I pull out a 5D, I don't think twice about taking a photo. It's like, well, better have it than not.
Right. It's almost like a trial and error thing.
Yeah.
Like you take it and you look in the back of the screen, and if it's it's good, then you're like, all right, that was a picture worth taking.
Yeah.
But it's it's decided after the fact.
And then you kind of move on, and then you forget you took that picture,
Mm-hmm.
and then you get home and you dump all the photos on your computer, and then like that photo. And I think something else that's interesting is that with digital photography, we've become so insistent on perfection in the photos.
Mm-hmm.
It's like we'll take 5 of them, and then we'll look for the best smile or the best,
Right.
The way that the person was looking in the photo.
Yeah.
Whereas with film, I mean, we do that to a certain extent. Maybe we'll take 2 or 3 of something and then find the best one. But there's more of an attitude of like, the way that it's captured is it's just the way we captured it.
It's perfectly imperfect.
Exactly. Because we look back at like our, baby photos and family photos that were taken on film, and half of them have, the exposure isn't proper on it, the white balance is off, the focus is blown, someone's blinking, but they're still in the photo albums because it still captured that moment. And it's kind of like with gear acquisition syndrome, right? So, the new camera comes out and suddenly everyone's like, oh yeah, the old one sucks. The old one was just terrible.
Might as well give it away.
And it's the same sort of thing here. It's like, well, no, it's not that film was terrible or that those photos were terrible. Sure, now we have things that can get us more, I guess, pristine images in a sense.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make that moment that was captured before less important or less less characteristic of that moment.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think half of that comes from flipping through like real photo albums. I was just flipping through a photo album and some photos that I've never seen before, and it was so like it. I even if I wasn't there, it brought me back to this moment in time, and it was this like rush of nostalgia that you don't get flipping through your iPad or on your computer. Like you feel like you are transported to like a window in time.
Yeah.
And holding like actual prints is got a special thing too. So the fact that that's where film kind of lives. It's either in the negative or it's in a print.
Yeah.
And it's not it's not meant to live on an iPad necessarily. And I think that just changes like how we remember those moments.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely, and you cherish them more because there aren't as many of them, and so you focus on them more. When I'm looking through my phone to find an image to share with someone, I'll be sitting there just flipping through trying to find that, and I'll flip through like 10 of the same image, and not one of those pictures stands out to me anymore because there's 10 of them or there's 15 of them. Whereas when you're dealing with a smaller amount, you cherish the individual photos a lot more.
Exactly.
So yeah, I would say like one of the reasons that a few of the reasons, I guess, that film photography is coming back is that number one, it's not nearly as sterile. There's more tangibility to it. It's something that like each one is cherished more, and even the art of taking it. We don't just turn the camera on, flip it on auto, and then take a bunch of photos. You actually have to pay attention to the settings. You have to make sure that you set your shutter speed properly, that you if you do have a built-in meter, then great that you at least pay attention to that, because if you are blowing the exposure, you're just blowing money at that point.
Exactly.
And then also just the fact that like each one, because there are so few of them, that you care about each one a lot more. And there's certainly, I think, a bit more of an art to it. Maybe I'm trying to think of the way to phrase this, because I don't want to say that there isn't art with taking digital photographs. There certainly is. There are certainly bad photographs that are taken on digital and good photographs that are taken on digital. There are bad photographs that are taken on film. I can't tell you how many times I've flipped through Instagram and someone's like, "Oh yes, I shot this on film," and I'm like, "That's great. It doesn't make it a good photo, though."
Right.
But there's more time that's spent, I think, composing sometimes.
Yeah, and definitely. There's definitely more time composing. And I think it comes down to like this kind of, you have to be in sync with your machinery. And you are completely in control of this thing that without your input, without like you mastering the art, it's not gonna work at all. Like the photo's gonna be completely wrong. And the fact that it is you only have a few exposures and you are completely in control, I think lends itself towards like this very careful attitude towards the photography. And you do, sometimes sit at the viewfinder waiting for the moment, and you just take that one, and then that's it. Whereas, like you said, on digital, you snap away and make sure that you got the right moment of the 50 you took or whatever.
Right. Just hold down the shutter button and pick one out
Exactly.
afterward.
Yeah. It's definitely, it's meditative to me. It's like, going out and shooting on my digital camera and forcing myself to use manual focus or something like that, except it's all of those things.
Yeah.
It's every aspect of it. And you kind of lose yourself in that.
Yeah, and I think that for me, for myself at least, and I think this goes for a lot of people too, we are so engulfed in this world of digital everything. We're behind our computers, our phones, our cars are so electronic at this point, that it's just overwhelming at a certain point. And for me, shooting film is a way of stepping away from that.
Absolutely.
Especially as someone who takes a lot of photos for work on digital, it's a way that I can take photos at home and not feel like I'm working.
For sure.
It's separate enough.
Yeah.
There's something about holding an old camera that you're caring for, but also can get beat up a little bit too. I think there are quite a few bulletproof 35 millimeter cameras that.
I mean, how the number of them that are still out there is a testament to how bulletproof they are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so just getting away from feeling like digital. Like the digital culture is running everything that we do, and certainly I have nothing against. Electronics. I mean, we have so many of them at home, but when it comes to creating art, it feels more like I am in control of the image. I'm not letting some machine dictate that to a certain extent.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about what your motivation is, like what my motivation is when I'm shooting for work and when I'm shooting, for personal reasons, but on a digital camera, as opposed to shooting for myself on film.
Sure.
And for me, it comes down to like who do I want this photograph to be for? And I'm curious to see your answer on this, but like when I shoot on film, it's almost like this is just for me.
Yeah.
Like it's I don't care if anyone else sees this.
Right.
It's just for me. Whereas if it's on my phone or on my stills camera or for work, it's obviously for someone else. It's for Instagram, it's for a client, it's whatever. But I definitely just don't really care if people see the film photos that I take necessarily. It's like as long as I have it and I took it, it makes me feel
It does feel
different.
more personal. Yeah. No, because it's the same way. To a certain extent, I think it's the same way for me. I haven't thought too much about that. It was always more of the feel of it rather than there's something to be said about it that just maybe some things that can't be said about it because you can't put it into words.
Right.
It's just the feel of a camera that's an older camera that's shooting to this film rather than to a memory card or something else.
Right.
But I agree with you that there. When I'm shooting for work or when I'm shooting for a client, it's, I need to make sure I check off a bunch of boxes. I need to make sure I get a picture of this person, this person, this person.
Right.
It has to be, each person has to have a wide, a tight, whatever. And none of those photos would I then go and frame or something like that. It's because they're part of kind of a larger, it's a conglomeration of images rather than individual photographs that I've taken that I'm going to cherish.
Right, like the individual ones speak for themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas like an album for work might only make sense in the album.
Right. Yeah, it definitely plays a part for me.
Yeah.
And I think part of it too, I mean, this isn't, certainly there are small digital cameras too, but I love the fact that I can have a full 35 millimeter camera that travels so well.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at like one of my favorite cameras to take with me is the Nikon F3, just because I can travel with that camera. I put a battery in it when I first bought it, and I just replaced it, and I've had the camera for 4 years. Like I haven't changed the battery in all that time. It just lasted that long.
Yeah.
And so I can just throw that in my bag, carefully, obviously, and go with it. And I know that it's not going to take up much space. It's going to be reliable and work for me. And as long as I have enough film, I'm not going to have issues. And so the size, especially when I don't know if I'm going to take photos, but I'm like, we're going to walk around the city. Who knows? Maybe I'll get some shots of my son or, family photos, something like that. It's much easier to take a 35 millimeter than it is to take digital.
When you brought up size, I thought you were going to talk about even smaller. I mean, the F3 is still...
Yeah, it's not a super small camera.
It's not super small. It's smaller than a 5D, but it's... they're the point and shoot 35 millimeter cameras that still blow my mind to this day. Like it looks like, I mean, a toy, and even like the disposable cameras, they're so tiny, but there's a full 35 millimeter sensor essentially in there, and you can just put that in your jeans pocket and call it a day.
Right. They're ridiculously small sometimes. It's like, how do you fit? Sometimes I look at that and I'm like, okay, you could fit all of that into a film camera, like even with autofocus and all of that.
Yeah.
I'm like, but you can't make a 35 millimeter digital camera that's that size? I mean,
not unless it's like Leica or somebody.
Yeah, that's true.
Then you don't get autofocus. Yeah, there really isn't a comparison to digital in that world.
One I haven't looked at, I know Sony makes one that's essentially a point and shoot camera, but it's
the RX 100.
It's one of those.
It's not the RX 100. It's the I know what you're talking about.
It's expensive.
It's got the A7R sensor in it.
Yeah.
It's like 36 or 42 megapixels or something, but it's a fixed lens, and I haven't.
Yeah, I mean, it looks great. I honestly, I don't think I'd spend that much on a digital camera that didn't have a user replaceable lens.
Yeah. I don't think I would either.
Yeah, but yeah, and I think also too, I like to take film cameras with me when I'm out on family events because I don't feel the pressure to take a bunch of photos.
Yeah.
And I've even used that as an excuse sometimes. It's kind of funny because we've gone to family functions and the family knows that, both my wife's side and my side know that I'm the photographer.
Yeah.
And so we'll go to an event and people won't bring cameras and then they'll be like, oh, Branden, grab some photos of this right here.
Yeah.
And then send them to me afterward.
It's like,
what they don't think about
is working. You're not getting paid.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And certainly sometimes I'm like, okay, I was going to take photos anyway.
Of course.
But there have definitely been times when I really am not in the mood to take pictures. Maybe I was going to snap one or two, but I wasn't going to take like 30 or 40.
Right.
And so many people don't understand that it's not just taking the photo. It's also going back. You have to dump the photo. You have to edit that photo, which if you're taking a bunch it can take a little while. And then exporting that, uploading it, sending it to them. So it's not just as simple as like, oh, I'm going to take it on my phone and then send it over.
Right.
Whereas if I've got a film camera with me, what I've done before is they'll be like, hey, take a bunch of pictures of this. And I'm like, sorry, it's on film. I don't want to use the shots up. I've only got a few more left on the roll. And so it's a selfish reason, but it definitely helps me to get out of shooting some shots that I really don't want to shoot just because it's so many times too, there are things that that they're not going to care about later.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, take a picture of that car or this or whatever.
Right.
And it's like you're not going to remember that in a day.
And that's what digital is for.
Yeah.
It's the stuff that you can shoot and then forget about, and it's not going to matter. Whereas you want to cherish those rolls of film because they're limited.
Yeah.
For
definitely.
Sure.
So
I'm curious to see if you. There's a couple of like blogs and YouTube channels that I follow that like to kind of mimic the experience of shooting film. People will say, throw a 2 gig SD card in your camera.
Sure.
Put on a vintage Nikon lens on it, so only manual focus, or whatever. Shoot only in JPEG so you can't really edit the crap out of your photos. Do you do any stuff like that? Like, do you ever?
Not really. I think
fun?
a lot of people, because I've heard the same sorts of things. Limit yourself in the ways that film limits you.
Yeah.
And then, but I think it's not just based on the limitations. I think for film, it's a combination of all of those, but it's also some other things too. The fact that, and I think a lot of people appreciate the fact that you can't see your photos right away. That certainly it's not the greatest situation all the time. Like there are some situations where I'm like, I know I have to get photos of this, and if I screw something up, if I mess up this roll, or if it just gets lost, or in the mail or something like that, then I'm out my photos.
Yeah.
That's not possible in this particular situation. But for family things, I can't tell you how much fun it is to send a roll off and have it developed. And then you come back to it, like I'll get the email that says your photos have been uploaded. Because I go most of the times through the darkroom.com. I've found their prices are pretty good compared to some of the other places I've found. And I love the fact that their digital scans are really high resolution. So I do like a certain digital aspect to my film photos. I like to be able to store them that way as well.
Right.
But yeah, it's like asking, what's great about, I don't know, you could pick a ton of things. And it's not just one thing there. It's not just the fact that I've got 36 images on there. It's not just the fact that it's an old camera. It's not just the fact that, I'm limited in a lot of ways. It's also the fact that I love the color of film, and I think a lot of other people do too. I came to a point a couple of years ago when I really started picking up film photography a lot more. It became something that I carried with me pretty frequently. My bag always has kind of a 35 millimeter camera in it, because I got to the point where I was taking all these photos on a 5D or the 1D, and I would do everything possible to mimic film in the edit. I would spend, so much time working on the curves and all of that from the
film grain on top.
Getting the right film grain. And in the end, I was like, okay, I'm spending so much time to try and mimic film. Why don't I just shoot film? So like the colors that I've gotten out of some photos, I'm just like, I don't know how I would replicate that on digital. Certainly you can get close, but there's a certain amount of intangibility to it it's like you don't really know how to put your finger on it. It just
for sure.
It looks different. It doesn't come from a Bayer sensor. It's coming from film grains on this film.
And it always looks right somehow. It's always like, I wouldn't tweak this. I mean, of course, there are shots that if you under or overexpose it, then it's like, I would definitely have tweaked this in digital. But it always looks how it should, like how it ought to look. Yeah, so for me, it's definitely a combination of a lot of things. The look that it gives you in the end. And it's also nice to get the image back, and I know I don't have to do anything else to it. Exactly.
Maybe if I'm going to post it to Instagram or throw it up on Facebook or something, then I'll adjust the brightness a little bit on the image if it's a little bit too bright or something like that. But I'm not going to sit there and spend hours working with it because it's already there. Which isn't the case with digital. I did it on the computer, and my workflow is pretty organized, but I dump all the photos on the computer. They go into one folder, sorted by day and by event and that sort of thing. And then I'll come back to it later. Sometimes it's weeks later to go and edit them. And it's always a burden. It's like, okay, my folder of unedited photos is building up. Like I need to go and edit those. And so it just becomes a chore at that point. Whereas with the film, I send it off and then I get back these images that are just beautiful. Or at least I hope they're beautiful if I did everything properly.
It is like a mini Christmas every time.
Yeah. And so there's a feeling of the unknown. You don't know how the photos are going to look until they come back. And certainly there are times when I just completely botch the exposure or I switch films and forget to adjust the ASA on the camera. But pretty frequently when I actually get things right, or occasionally when I get things right, I get the photos back and I'm happy about it. And there's a sense of joy there. And my hit rate is also much, much higher when I'm shooting on film. I miss focus very rarely, even though it's manual focus on most of my 35 millimeter cameras and autofocus on the digital side. And I just like the composition more. I like the way that I took it. And and I think there's also something to be said about having a little distance from the photos. It's like when I'm editing video too. When I finish a piece, usually I don't go, yes, I love this. I'm like, I'm too close to it. I've spent so much time on it that it's lost the magic.
You got to step back from it at least for like a day or two and look at it with fresh eyes just to actually see it for the way that it is.
Yeah, and with digital, that's what ends up happening for me. I get too into it, and so then I don't end up loving the photos in the end. Even though I like the way that I edited them, I look at it objectively and I say, I think I did a pretty decent job on that. But I don't have this I'm not drawn back to the image. I don't go and look at it again and go, that just, I love the way that looks because I've been too close to it the whole time. And I think there's also a part for me where I like the idea of, I haven't been able to do this, but I would love to just go backpacking and take a camera and just chronicle the journey. And I'm like, well, I could do that with a film camera. I could just take a bunch of film, but I'd run out of batteries most likely my digital. And you could make the argument, sure, just take like 6 5D batteries and you're going to be fine because you're not going to run through all of those. Like one of them typically lasts a day or so. But there's just something about being off the digital grid.
Oh yeah,
I think for me.
Yeah, I think that's a dream that a lot of photographers have. Is like to totally go off the grid, have nothing but your camera, and just kind of live with that in nature, for sure.
Yeah. And I think too there are some I think reasons why film is going to have a hard time coming all the way back. Not that I think film will ever be what it used to be. You know, it used to be the only way to capture images, and now digital's never going to lose its crown. I don't think in terms of the great majority of the country. But I think there are some hindrances to it coming back in full force. One of them being that just nobody makes actual film cameras these days. There are exceptions to that.
Of course.
Nikon, for example, still makes the F6, an amazing camera.
They make 2 film cameras still, don't they?
Yes, they do. What is it, the FM10 or something?
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's like the full manual one, and then they have like the fully automated one.
Yeah. So there are certainly cameras still being made. I know Lomo still makes a ton.
But they're different. They have a different flavor than what they used to.
Yeah,
You know, because they're all kind of niche cameras that are Holgas that are supposed to look weird. And Lomo definitely has that kind of market where it's like, it's supposed to look bad in certain ways.
Yeah.
Definitely not how it used to be.
Right. And I have a feeling that the Nikon camera is going to be the last one that they produce. They might hold on to it for a long time, but I don't know. There's something that makes me doubt that Nikon is going to produce something after the F6.
Yeah.
I'm not going to see an F7, I don't think. I would love that. I would love to see them come out with updated autofocus and all of that. And I would love to see some other 35 millimeter cameras that are primarily, manual focus. I know that Leica still makes the M7 is their current.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so
they definitely make a film camera still.
Right. So you can still find film cameras out there that are being produced brand new, but by and large, like Canon doesn't make one anymore.
Yeah.
So many other companies that used to compete in that arena just don't have anything to offer these days.
A lot of the camera companies just don't exist anymore.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true. A lot of them have died out, and a lot of them have kind of gone the way of the dodo.
But there are a lot of also camera companies that went away and now are coming back.
Yeah,
like Polaroid and Kodak, which is not necessarily expected, but it's appreciated.
Yeah. Well, and I think that something that is really going to help film manufacturers and manufacturers of 35 millimeter cameras is knowing what place they need to be in.
Right.
It's kind of like Swiss watches. So Swiss watches, it used to be that analog watches, non-battery powered watches were really the only way to buy a watch. And then digital watches came along in what was the 70s, or they became popular in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. And then everyone had those, like the Casios and the whatever else. And so a lot of the Swiss watchmakers took a hit because they weren't expecting that drop in sales. But so many of them are very strong now because they understand what place they, what needs they satisfy, and it's in more of a niche, higher end market. And I think that film, maybe it won't be higher end necessarily, but when film manufacturers understand that they're never going to have the same sales that they used to, whether it be of cameras or of film itself, and know, we need to make this on a smaller scale, but make that viable, I think that there will be a lot of success there.
Yeah, Leica definitely still has a lot of success with that. You know, like the low volume, high price stuff that it is like a Swiss watch in a lot of ways. The machinery is immaculate, and it just works so perfectly, and it feels so right.
Right,
and it is like an investment, like a nice watch. It's something that you keep with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
and so there's definitely camera companies like Leica, I think, will continue to find success. I'm not sure what Nikon is going to do, though. Like you said, I'm not sure if they're going to make an F7.
Yeah, I hope they keep around the F6 because
one
of these days I plan to pick one of those up. It is a beautiful camera.
Yeah,
it's a beautiful camera, but I don't know that they're going to replace it. But yeah, like Kodak, you brought up Kodak and Polaroid. Both of them have gone through very difficult times because they were geared up for high production, high volume. And then when film kind of dropped back and had a pretty major setback, they weren't prepared for that. But now, as film is coming back and they can see that there's a need there is a desire to have some high-quality films, beside the fact that Fuji's killing off everything, which is really disappointing,
Yeah.
you have companies like Ilford and companies like Kodak that are still producing and coming out with new films too.
Yeah.
And you can see that a lot of people are excited about that. I mean, it makes some pretty big headlines when Kodak announces a new film, like they're bringing back Ektachrome.
Yeah.
They just announced, what is it, T-Max P3200?
I didn't know about this.
Yeah, it's a black and white film they're bringing back. So it's supposed to compete with Ilford Delta 3200. So and the shots that I've seen so far on it, because it's not widely available right now, but you can still find it places, and the shots are gorgeous.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely a need for film development at this point, and kind of bringing some of that back. And I think a lot of companies will, like Kodak and Polaroid, with the Impossible Project buying back Polaroid.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see where it goes from here on out, and where they find a viable niche.
I think something that's helped film, in a different way but related, is in cinema. It's always been the go-to.
Yeah.
And even you could say maybe in the last 2 or 3 years.
Sure.
Whereas today the majority of big films coming out are shot digitally. But even still, like, there are so many amazing high-budget movies that are shot on film because that's what the DPs and the directors want.
Yeah.
Like, that's, like you said, like the colorist is probably going to spend hours and hours and hours trying to replicate the film look. So they're just going to shoot on no, they're going to shoot on film. Just
right.
And
it comes back to also just the amount of time and effort that goes into it. I mean, you get you spend so much more time trying to figure out your shots, and you're not just saying, okay, we'll just keep it rolling. We'll run this a few more times. It's there's a certain amount of dealing with the time that you have. And I know as we're actually looking to start shooting some film, whether it be 16 millimeter or hopefully 35 at some point, for some of our pieces as well. We're looking at the cost, and it's like, okay, so to shoot the equivalent amount of like 128 gigs, which on the Red gives you, 12 minutes of footage, it's going to be like $500 and for shooting on 35 millimeter.
Holy cow.
And so it is so much more expensive in a lot of ways, but there's also that intrigue. I sit there and I go, yeah, but I want to do it. I know that it's more expensive, but I want to have that time crunch and practice everything so well beforehand that when we hit record, and it's actually recording, when it's actually imprinting on that film, we know we have to do it smoothly and seamlessly, and everyone's on their toes. There's not kind of a lackadaisical, if we don't get it this time, we'll just shoot it again.
Absolutely.
Not that people always do that with digital, but I think there's kind of that, you get tired and you kind of get off your, you're not working as efficiently, and film keeps you on your toes.
Absolutely.
It's kind of an adrenaline rush.
You could compare it to that.
Yeah.
It's definitely, it puts you a little bit in like emergency mode, where you have to, you have a lot of constraints put on you, and you have to deliver. You have to make sure that you make the best of it given those constraints.
Yeah.
And you kind of work in overtime. Your brain's just thinking about, how do I make this one shot that I have, the one shot.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely as technology progresses to the point where film is no longer on the same competitive level, I guess, as digital. Now, you can't really say that most films are as high resolution, I suppose, as a lot of digital cameras. I've seen so many comparisons, and I always want to sit there and tell myself, no, film, it's still just as high resolution, but once you scan it in and you look at it, like it's becoming less of a competitive. The film isn't as competitive on that side,
right?
But it will always have that tangibility that digital doesn't have. That the just feel of shooting film that is somehow different. Even if the camera bodies are identical, the sound that it makes, not being able to see the image right away, the beautiful color that you get back afterwards, it's completely, without your doing. Like I didn't color that image.
Yeah.
I might have chosen what landscape I shoot or what lighting I used for that portrait, but I did not color that image in the same way that I would color a digital image in Lightroom. All of that's just going to keep people coming back, I think. And as we have a generation now that's growing up with so much technology and is just ready to step away from that and find something new, I guess. And also trying to differentiate themselves. When everyone has a great digital camera, then how do you set yourself apart?
Yeah.
Aside from the actual art of taking it, because a good camera does not make a good photographer.
Yeah.
There's something that shooting on film is definitely these days a way to set yourself apart.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, I mean, when you leave something to a machine, you know, if you have a RED right next to, you know, a 35 millimeter film camera or a Super 35 film camera, you know, one of them is a chemical process and one is a digital process.
Yeah, ones and zeros.
And there's something just that feels a little bit more human about the film acquisition process.
Yeah. So do you think the film's going to keep coming back? Do you think we're kind of at a point where it's not going to go too much further?
Well, I mean, I've bought more film cameras recently than ever in my life.
Yeah.
I don't know if
so
that's
cheap.
represent. Yeah, well,
I mean,
some
comparatively,
of them. Yeah, some of them.
Certainly, if you're getting something that's, you know, like the F6, you can't get super cheap these days. But you know, it's not like you're buying a new Canon or Nikon or Sony camera right now. It's especially if you're buying vintage.
I think the trend is going to continue for the foreseeable future, and it's going to be like this dark horse of cinema and this dark horse of photography, that film is just there and kind of has its ace in the hole, that look and that feel. But I don't think it's ever going to be a majority, obviously, ever again, unfortunately. Unless there's some crazy breakthrough with development processes. But no, I think eventually it's going to be what happened to vinyl.
Yeah. Where
every hipster in the world went to Urban Outfitters and bought a record player and all the vinyl that they could afford. And I think it's going to have its day, and then it's going to be the next thing, unfortunately. But I'm going to enjoy it while it lasts, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to see it to the end.
I think now, and I don't know what profits Kodak is making at this point. I don't know if this is just because they've had an influx of investments and suddenly they're producing more film, or if they're actually doing really well financially. I know that film sales have continued to increase year over year. I think it was like every year now there's been something like a 5% increase in film sales.
Interesting.
Don't quote me on those numbers. I know that I was reading something about, that every year since, I want to say it was 2013.
Okay.
I could be wrong, but the film sales have been coming back. But
yeah,
certainly they're not ever going to be what they were, and they're not ever going to be the majority anymore. But I think for those who don't mind taking a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra creativity to try and figure out some new ways of capturing those images, and rather than just pointing a camera in a direction and pushing down on the shutter button, film will always kind of be there and be an option, as long as there are companies that are still making it. So
yes, and we are reliant on the fact that Kodak and all of these companies keep making film,
right?
And it's not going to last forever,
right? And the ability to pick up film cameras, which at this point it is a bit worrisome that the majority of photographers at this point that are shooting film are shooting on film cameras that are 25 plus years old. I mean, I don't really own a film camera that was made after 1999, I don't think.
I definitely don't. Other than that the Lomo. Yeah. That's the only one.
I guess 2001 for me. But yeah, I mean, they're aging. And so we need some manufacturers to come back and sink some money into development. And I don't think they'll be as difficult to make again as like digital cameras are. You can launch a company and I feel like go from 0 to 60 in making a film camera faster than you can with making a digital camera.
I mean, it's got to be that way. I would hope so. I mean, like the technology's already very well cemented.
Right.
It's not like they're creating new blueprints or anything.
And you don't have to worry about making the film. Like you would have to worry about making a sensor for a digital camera. It's much simpler. So. All right, we'll go ahead and end it there. Just wanted to say thank you all for listening, and wanted to thank Spirit Juice Studios again for letting us use this space. For those of you who don't know, this is not my full-time job. I work for Spirit Juice Studios. We have a great boss, very willing to support this sort of thing and let us kind of use the studio space to do this. So I encourage you to go to spiritjuicestudios.com. That's spiritjuicestudios.com. There's a lot of great videos up there. I really like the work that we do, and we've won a few awards for it too, so it's worth checking out. And yeah, be sure to visit our website as well at thatvintagelens.com. We've got a lot of great updates coming up down the road. Got some great topics too. Going to be talking about some of our favorite lens sets, whether that be cinema or photo, maybe some of our favorite film stocks, and we got a lot of other ideas too. So be sure to like and subscribe for all those updates, and thanks again for listening.